So hello and welcome to another seminar through the kind of Pyro seminars I'm doing with Patreon. This must be my fourth now, maybe more. I started these, I think it was in late 2016. And it's my attempt to create a space where we can go deeper into the issues of pyrotheology, philosophy, radical theology, etc. So far, we've done a seminar on the absurd, where I argue that there are religions of the pleasure principle, which are religions of hedonism. There are secular and sacred versions of them, but any religion that says you can have what you want, you can know everything, you can fill the lack in the core of your being, right? Anything that promises that is kind of like, I would call a religion of the pleasure principle. And then there's religions of the reality principle. And that's, listen, just get rid of your desire, back out of life, accept the way things are, accept nothingness. That's the reality principle religions. And I argued for Christianity as a religion of the absurd. And the absurd, for me, doesn't fall into either of these categories, but lives in the tension between them. So you can go back and listen to that. If you're having any trouble finding those Pyro seminars, just let me know. But you have access to them all. We also did a talk. I looked at belief, how belief functions in pyrotheology, how we are not transparent to ourselves. And actually, you know, we talk a lot about what we believe. People say, I believe X, Y, and Z. But there's an ancient tradition, goes right back to Socrates and before, that says we are not transparent to ourselves, that it's actually very hard to know what you believe, that we think that what we believe is in our minds, in our consciousness, but often that's a defense to protect us from really seeing what we do believe. So we might resent our family, for example, but we hide it between excessive gift giving and being so nice to them. And we think that obviously we love our parents, but actually we might find that we have bitterness and unresolved issues. So I looked at the nature of belief. I looked at how the real challenge, part of the real challenge of being human is to actually come to terms with what you believe, face what you believe, and work through it. So I did a seminar on that. I also did a Q&A session. And now this week, this month, I want to look at the themes of sin and salvation. And it's Easter. It's Holy Saturday, as they call it. And so I wanted to bring together two things that everybody knows Easter is about. There is Easter eggs and there is the crucifixion, right? So how do we mold these two together? And of course, the perfect way is to look at what does the film Alien, the movies Alien, tell us about religion. Because if you've ever watched Alien, there are Easter eggs. Well, there are eggs. They're not the tastiest of eggs, but there are eggs. And the last movie in the Alien franchise, called Prometheus, has deep theological insight. It implicitly touches on themes of Christianity, themes of religion. So we're going to look at what they are in a second. And, you know, I want to try to draw this seminar around to a reflection on the meaning of the crucifixion and the resurrection. But I don't want to do too much because I'm going to do these every month, maybe more. And I always try and do too much. So let's stick with sin for now and see if we can touch on salvation by the end. And if we don't get there, that's where we'll pick up next time. So in terms of sin, it is a word that is dogged by moral thinking. It's a word that generally means doing something bad. If you ask them what sin is. But actually, I think it is a deeply, it has a deeply theoretical term that has a very precise meaning. And it's not to do with morality at all. Not initially anyway. We'll get to the moral bit in a little while. But the word sin for me describes a sense of separation that we experience as being human. Now, I've talked about this in previous seminars, so I won't go into this in detail, but original sin, which I've explored before, is an original sense of separation, of loss. That to be human is to feel that we are lacking something, that there is something that will make us whole and complete. And we might not think that in our minds, but in different ways we portray this sense in which there is something out there that will satisfy us and complete us, and we're either trying to reach it or we're trying to trying to ignore it. But it is there. It is this sense of separation, of lack, of need that is reflected in us. Now, this could be called the ontological dimension of sin. I want to argue that sin has three dimensions: the ontological, the ontic, and the ethical. So the ontological part is simply the word sin, or the term original sin, simply describes a universal human experience of feeling a certain lack at the core of our existence. And this is no bad thing. Desire is all about lack. So, for example, if we didn't desire, we wouldn't get out of bed. We wouldn't do anything, and to desire something is to, in a sense, not have something, to want something. So this lack is not necessarily bad, although we often experience it as bad. So that's the ontological dimension. It's just simply naming a sense of lack that we feel. The ontic dimension of sin, ontic simply means stuff, like things. Ontological means the core of what it means to be. And ontic means things that you can touch, see, taste, and feel. Your computer is an ontic thing. The chair I'm sitting on is a thing. And so the ontic dimension of sin could be described as any object that we think will fill that lack. So we have this sense of a lost object, something we've lost, and then we pick something in the world that we think will fix that, something that we think is the lost object. It might be money, fame, religion, whatever it is. And we focus on that. And it can be negative. It can be a scapegoat. We can focus on something that we think we need to get rid of in order to get what we want. So it can be the core of sectarianism and racism, etc. Or it can be so that's a scapegoat, or it can be a sacred object, something like money or fame that we think we need. And then there is the ethical dimension. The ethical dimension, I would argue, is what we do in order to get that thing that we think will make us whole and complete, that we will destroy ourselves, we will destroy other people, we'll destroy our environment in order to try to get that thing, or to rid the world of that scapegoat. So there's kind of three dimensions. In this way, sin is not some sort of like mystical thing. The existentialists knew what it meant when they talked about a sense of alienation that is core to being human. So it's a really useful term. At the very point where a lot of progressives want to get rid of the term original sin because they think it's bad, I'm like, no, it's brilliant. It captures something that is talked about in continental philosophy, and it captures something that's talked about in psychoanalysis, and it captures this thing very, very beautifully. So in light of that, I want to turn to this movie Prometheus. Okay, so the interesting thing about the Alien franchise is that we're always wondering, where did this alien come from? In the very first movies, it's just there. It just exists. It's this creature that is unrelenting. It is completely destructive. It's some alien from outer space that we have encountered quite by chance. And it has this incredibly destructive dimension. But then as the films kind of like progress, we start to ask ourselves, what is the origin of this of this alien. And the first theories were that this alien was a biological weapon created by some advanced species. So it's like, you know, it's an advanced biological weapon to be used in some sort of like extraterrestrial civil war. But in Prometheus, we get a hint at the answer. Now, it'll be interesting to see whether this pans out when the new movie comes out. But I think this is beautifully expressed. We get a beautiful kind of mythology of the alien in Prometheus. So in Prometheus, we start off by actually encountering the alien species that's hinted at in the previous movies, and they're called the Engineers. So I'm just going to show you a clip from the very start of Prometheus. I'm going to talk it through because there's not many words, and so anybody who's just listening to this, it'll be helpful. Let's see. Okay, so it's a black screen. And we see a planet. Now, this planet is lifeless, but we assume that it is the planet Earth. And so now the camera is kind of descending onto this lifeless planet, and we see the landscape, which I think is Iceland in reality. But this is beautiful landscape of this utterly desolate place, which, as I say, we later learn is Earth. The screen might be a little bit choppy depending on the internet speeds, but as long as the audio works, that's fine. Okay, now we are coming to some water and a waterfall. Which is going to be the origin of all life on the planet. This is going to be the starting point for life on planet Earth. We see a great spaceship taking off. And they've left somebody, so there's a single figure who's like a monastic figure with like a cape. And this is one of the Engineers. The Engineers are the advanced species that basically gave birth to humanity. And what he has is a cup. And in this cup, there is this black goo, a black substance. He drinks it. And then he immediately starts to die. His body begins to decompose. And we see like his blood, and then it goes deeper. We see his kind of the atoms and the DNA structure, which begins to break down. And now his body falls into the water and begins to completely decompose. And then from that, we see the DNA going into the water, and then the assumption is this is the beginning of all human life. Oh, in fact, yeah, we see a cell splitting and splitting again and splitting again. So that is the beginning of Prometheus. So what we have here is this black substance is being consumed by this alien, this engineer. His body breaks down, he dies and he decomposes, and the result is the birth of all life. Now, straight after this, we move forward to the present day. I think just a little bit later than the present day, where some archaeologists discover some cave paintings that have a star constellation. And basically, there are a number of these paintings all over the world that show that the engineers have returned to Earth many times and have ultimately given a little bit of a hint as to where they live. And the idea is that the engineers have given enough information that when we have the technology to leave planet Earth, to leave our star system, we will be able to go to them and meet them. So that happens next. And so, of course, what happens is there is an expedition that is put on. They get together a number of individuals and then fly out to the planet that is on these cave paintings. All right. So now I want to fast forward to when they've got to the planet and they have encountered a disaster. Something has gone wrong. There are engineers who have died, and there is all of this black substance. Oh yes, the image might freeze from time to time. Oh, maybe it's still frozen. Hopefully it'll start working again if you're having trouble. We're going to go back in. Oh, here we go. So this is the android who has some of the black substance kept on the ship.
Genetic view. Okay. Let's have a look at its DNA. Isolate the strand. Okay. Compare it to the gene sample. Yeah. Overlay.
Now they're currently looking at the engineer's DNA and working out that they are direct descendants of the engineers. And then this is the black substance.
It's us. It's everything. What killed them?
Now, the alien is touching this and nothing is happening. The substance is completely inert. But now he's going to introduce it to humans.
Am I interrupting? Thought you might be running low.
Pour yourself a glass, pal.
Thank you, but I'm afraid it will be wasted on me.
Ah, all right. I almost forgot you're not a real boy, haven't you?
I'm very sorry that your engineers are all gone, Dr. Holloway.
You think we wasted our time coming here, don't you?
Your question depends on me understanding what you hope to achieve by coming here.
What we hope to achieve was to meet our makers, to get answers. Why they even made us in the first place.
Why do you think your people made me?
We made you guys because.
Can you imagine how disappointing it would be for you to hear the same thing from your creator?
I guess it's a good thing you can't be disappointed.
Yes. It's wonderful, actually. May I ask you something?
Please do.
How far would you go to get what you came all this way for? Your answers. What would you be willing to do?
Anything and everything.
It's worth drinking to, I'd imagine.
So at this point, the android puts the black substance into the drink that he's giving to this scientist.
There's mud in your eyebrow.
Good health.
Now, basically what happens after this is that this black substance starts to, it starts to kind of take him apart, but he has sex with his partner before he dies horribly. And we discover that she is pregnant. Now, interestingly, all of this is happening around Christmas. And on Christmas Day, this female scientist finds out that she is pregnant with a child. And I'm going to go to that little bit now. Sorry. Share screen. You'll see she has a cross around her neck.
My deepest condolences. I'm going to have to take this. Maybe contaminate it.
If there's a contagion, they were all exposed. We need to run blood work on everyone who set foot in the pyramid.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
I understand how inappropriate this is, given the circumstances. But as you ordered quarantine fail-safes, it's my responsibility to ask, have you and Dr. Holloway had any intimate contact recently? Since you and he were so close, I just want to be as thorough as possible. My. You're pregnant. From the look of it, 3 months, sir.
If possible. I can't be pregnant.
Did you have intercourse with Dr. Holloway?
Yes. But 10 hours ago, there's no blood away. I'm 3 months pregnant.
Well, doctor, it's not exactly a traditional fetus.
I want to see it.
Don't think that's a good idea.
David, I want to see it.
Now, doctor.
I want to see it. I want it out of me.
I'm afraid we don't have the personnel to perform a procedure like that.
So obviously the symbolism here is it's Christmas Day. She is pregnant with a very special child. Just like, you know, in Christmas Day, Jesus, special child. And this is a baby that will be born. But it's kind of like the opposite of Christ. This is Antichrist. This is basically, we're discovering in Prometheus, the alien is Antichrist. So what we have then are three things. We have, when the black substance encounters the engineers, they embrace death and it gives birth to life. When the black substance is touched by the android, nothing happens because the android, in a sense, doesn't have an inner soul. But when this black substance touches humans, it gives birth ultimately to this creature. So what we discover is that the alien is not something from outer space. It's an alien from inner space. It's something very intimately connected with being human. And what we discover in the movie is, in a sense, why this alien represents something about us. So what I want to do is show you another little clip of whenever the scientist meets the person who's put the whole expedition on. Like the guy called Whalen, who we think is dead, has put this expedition on, but we discover that he is not dead. Now, here we go.
Our best option.
She's just basically got the alien out of her body at this point. This is Mr. Whalen. Who's incredibly old now, like he's over 100. He only has a matter of days left to live.
You're on the ship all this time. Why?
Well, I have a few days of life left in me here. I want to waste them until I was sure that you could deliver what you promised. Meet my maker.
There we are, sir. Nice and clean.
Haven't you told him they're all gone?
But they're not all gone, Dr. Shaw. One of them is still alive. We're on our way to see him now.
What? Turn me around. You convinced me that these things made us. And surely they could save us. I'll stick with it.
Okay, basically what we discover right here is that this whole expedition has been put on by Whalen because he doesn't want to die. He wants to find the creators of the human species, who he knows are super advanced, and he wants them to give him more life. Now, interestingly, everybody on the expedition is driven by something. There are people who are driven by money. They're on the expedition because it will make them rich. There are people who are on the expedition because they want their reputation to expand, or because they are searching after ultimate truth. There's all of these different motivations, but the ultimate motivation of the person behind it all is not to die. So all of them are frantically driven by something. And this can be described as what Freud calls death drive. It is a desire to have this drive to flee from death, from unknowing, from doubt, complexity, from ambiguity. It's the desire to be like God, right? This fundamental drive, this death drive. And the alien comes from that, because what we realize is this black substance is not evil. It simply reflects the essence of whatever species it comes into contact with. So the engineers who embrace death, they give birth to life. For the alien, nothing happens. Sorry, the android, nothing happens. But for human beings, the essence of the refusal to face death is the birth of this horrific creature. And interestingly, in the movie, there's a hint that something went wrong 2,000 years ago, that the alien species visited Earth, something happened, they came back, and disaster struck. So, of course, again, we have the 2,000 years thing. This is like, they're referencing, Jesus. And the implication is Jesus was potentially one of the engineers. He was killed. The black substance mutated into something horrific, and ultimately it killed the engineers. Now, the reason why I think this is interesting is because it actually, I think, gets to the heart of what salvation means. So sin, from a theological perspective, is this drive for wholeness and completeness, this drive to escape death, to be like God, to lack the lack, which is in the very founding story of the Jewish tradition, where Adam and Eve want to eat this apple in order to be like God, to have wholeness and completeness. And then, we have the rest of the narrative, what happens after that. The alien is the material manifestation of that death drive. In other words, the alien is a cinematic manifestation of what the theological term sin means, which is the frenetic drive for wholeness. And what you see in the alien is, of course, this frenetic, unrelenting drive that just will not stop. It's like this unyielding drive for life that the alien represents, that will do anything. It's all its destructive power is in the propagation of its continual life, to the point that individual aliens, they don't mind. They'll just attack until they die. But the idea is to just keep going and keep going and keep going, keep going. Now, how this relates, I think, to Christianity, especially now, we're at Easter, is we can think of Jesus as a figure who lacked this lack, who lacked this sense of death drive, who lacked this sense of having to be whole and complete, right? In a sense, whenever the early church, says that Jesus was without sin, we can articulate that as this figure is without this sense of driving lack. And then with the crucifixion, again, the theological understanding of the crucifixion is that this figure took on this lack. This figure who was without the lack became the lack. Now you can understand that in a sense of, like, think about money. Money has no value, but represents all value. So, money is not valuable at all, especially when it's noughts and ones in a computer, but it represents all value. Christ is, whenever someone says is without sin, but represents all sin, it's kind of a similar thing. Now, we could talk about actually what, who this figure historically was. We don't know. We have no idea, but this idea was born. There was a sense that in the early church, there was someone who didn't have this death drive. And then in the symbolism of the crucifixion, you have Christ becoming the lack. And we see this in the phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is this sense of experience of a gap, a lack in the core of your being. You're separated, you feel this lack. So you have this beautifully articulated on the cross. And then you have this moment where the temple curtain rips in two. Now, this is key because in the psychoanalytic tradition, this sense of separation makes us believe that there is something that we've lost, but there's nothing that we've lost. This lack is fundamental to, this is a fundamental aspect of being human. This is that when we separate from our primary caregiver, usually our mother, we sense that we've lost something, but it's the separation itself that gives birth to us. To be a me is to experience things that are not me. To have an inner world is to experience an outer world. So separation is part of what it means to be human. So Christ then experiences this. I'm very sorry that got cut off. The internet went off. But we're back. Yes. So what I was saying is that the point where the temple curtain rips in two is the point where we see behind the curtain and we realize that the thing we think we're separated from doesn't exist. Because in psychoanalysis, there's this idea that we feel we've lost something. We feel that if we could only get it back, then everything would be wonderful and everything would be good. But the truth is we haven't lost anything. And the fundamental insight is to see that, is to realize that this lack that we feel is not something that can be fulfilled. And the very desire to fulfill it is what oppresses us, what weighs us down. And so in the symbolism of the crucifixion, you have the temple curtain ripping. Behind the temple curtain is the Holy of Holies. That is the thing that is supposed to make us whole and complete. That is where the holy dwells. And when the temple curtain rips, we realize there's nothing there. Just like the Wizard of Oz moment. The temple curtain rips and we see that behind it is not some crazy God figure, but just an empty room. And this can be called the forgiveness of sin, because think of sin as a lack, which we've talked about, and think of debts as a lack. If you owe money, you owe money because there is a lack of money. You owe something, there is this lack that has to be paid. Now in Christianity, there is this idea that the debt is not paid. This lack is not filled, but rather is forgiven. To forgive a debt is different than to pay a debt. To forgive a debt is to say the nothing that is something that is binding you to institutions that you don't like and all of that, that is nothing. It's the forgiveness of a debt is not to pay it, it's to say, don't worry about that nothingness. It doesn't control you anymore. So symbolically, what you see in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus is a figure who is without the death drive, becoming the death drive, experiencing the sense of loss, and then overcoming it, realizing that there is nothing that we are separated from. And when you read that in the Gospels, you begin to understand the form of life that Christianity is expressing or propagating, which is a form of life in which we are freed from this obsessive drive, this death drive for wholeness and completeness, to escape our finitude, to escape our death. And that actually life is in being able to embrace those aspects of ourselves. Now, this isn't giving up all desire. It's just giving up the desire for wholeness and completeness and embracing the enjoyment of lack, the enjoyment of not having the answers, of learning more, of exploring the world, of never feeling that you're going to get to the end of it all. That is a healthy form of desire. But an unhealthy form of desire is a desire that is wanting to aim at something, to have something, that thinks it can be satisfied in some object, if only it had. Whereas true desire is a desire that enjoys desire itself. It enjoys the circling around, the not having. It finds satisfaction in not being satisfied. Now, a way of thinking about this, I've talked about this in my Facebook Live videos. If you think about our current economic system, the thinker Todd McGowan says that what we get in capitalism is we get a promise that we can have what we want and we get what we need. And what he means by that is we get the promise of satisfaction, which is what we want. We want satisfaction, fulfillment, and capitalism promises that. But what we get is need. What we get is lack. In other words, we don't get the thing that will make us satisfied. What we end up with is a sense of loss, a sense that we're not getting what we want. Now, Todd McGowan says we need this lack because that actually makes the world go round. It's, as I say, what gets us out of bed. It's what gets us into love affairs. It's what gets us to invent things. But for him, the problem is we live in a system where we get this lack in a way that is painful to us materially and psychologically. We don't enjoy it. In fact, we despise it and we hate it and we want to get rid of it. The alternative is not to have a system where we get what we want, which is satisfaction, and get rid of what we need, which is lack, but a system in which we get what we need in a way that we want, which means we get a sense of lack in a way that we enjoy the very movement itself. We enjoy the dissatisfaction. We enjoy not having what we want, which brings us back to the very first Pyro seminar on the absurd, where the absurd is embracing the lack of knowledge or the lack of certainty and actually finding that to be a really positive and good place. So in short, just to kind of bring this to a conclusion, what we learn in Prometheus is that this alien is not some evil creature from outer space, but is a reflection of inner space. It is the material manifestation of a human drive for wholeness, completeness, never-ending life. And in that very pursuit, it creates this destructive drive. So it is the material manifestation of what we can call sin in radical theology. And Christianity's salvation lies precisely in helping us get rid of that death drive, that drive for wholeness, completeness, for unending life. What helps us embrace doubt, complexity, ambiguity, unknowing, what helps us embrace our finitude. And in doing that, like the engineers, that actually is a much more productive and healthy type of life that gives birth to things. That is the very refusal of death and decay that actually is destructive, and the very embrace of those things which brings life. And that we see this reflected in the very story of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. Because what we have in the resurrection is the idea of God, not as some object that will satisfy us and make us whole, but God as the name we give to the depth that we experience in the act of love itself, as we give ourselves to the world, as we give ourselves to our neighbor, as we engage in political activities, we find this meaning and this depth in the very struggle itself. And that is resurrection God. God who is where two or three are gathered together. You know, in the communion, we see this with the Eucharist. You have the bread and the wine, which is kind of the sacred object that you can touch and taste and see. Then you have the disappearance of that in your body. You eat it, you drink it, you consume it, and it's gone. And then you have the return of the sacred. It's not as an object. It is now the body of believers. We are the body of God in the world, acting together. Okay, so that in a nutshell is why I think Prometheus is an interesting theological movie, has some deep insight into helping us understand the human condition, and even gives us a glimpse into what salvation might mean. So I just want to see if anyone has any questions or thoughts. Please write down any thoughts that you have, and we'll take it from there. Angel says, realize there is nothing you're separated from. I'm confused. Are you saying the gift is desire? So we experience a lie, original lack, and salvation is ignoring this on a universal scale, but enjoying it as, okay, hold on, sorry, I'm not following you here. Let me see. Are you saying the gift is desire? Yes, desire itself, because We experience a lie, original lack. And salvation is ignoring this, enjoying it in a secondary way, such as hunger, enjoying a good meal. Okay, if I hear you right, Angel, you're saying that the challenge is getting rid of desire that seeks an end. You know, the desire that says, if only I could get enough money, then I'll be happy, to desire that is ongoing. You know, so you enjoy good food, you enjoy sports is a perfect example. Sports never ends. You enjoy being with your team through the wins and the losses. You kind of are sticking with your team. You know their story, and the desire just keeps on going. If that's what you're saying, then yes, the second type of desire is healthy desire, and the first is death drive. And for me, salvation is, in a sense, helping human beings experience this second form of desire, which, by the way, has political consequences, cultural consequences in our individual lives. I've said it before, but it's the idea that instead of having the freedom to pursue what will make us whole, we have freedom from the pursuit of what will make us whole. We have freedom to enjoy without having some sort of end in mind. And then Richard says, is the idea of the engineers dying the kenosis of God? You know, I didn't make that connection, but but it is actually what I'm saying in a sense, actually. So the kenosis of God is the self-emptying of the divine. And kind of, what I'm arguing is that the engineers, in their self-emptying, in their giving up of their own lives, in that very act, give life, and kind of give of themselves and become greater than themselves. So yes, Richard, actually, although I didn't put it that way, that's exactly what I'm talking about, that this act of the engineers is a very good theological symbolism for the kenosis of God, for the self-emptying of the divine. That is what we as human beings, I think, need to be emulating, and that is what we try to avoid. Candice says, if I'm following you, are hedonistic religions inherently sinful in this definition? Yes, because what they do is they promise some wholeness and completeness at the end of some sort of process. There are sacred and secular versions of it. There's lots of secular versions of this hedonistic religion that says if you just do enough drugs, you just have enough money, you just, go to enough yoga classes, then you'll be, fixed. And there are obviously religious versions of it as well. What can I say about that? So yeah, those religions of hedonism are propagating this very notion. Oh yeah, I'll say it like this. The devil in the Bible, the very first definition of the devil, which is the serpent, is that the serpent is promising wholeness and completeness. You eat that apple and you will be like God, right? The very first experience of the serpent in the Bible is this voice that is telling you that if you only do certain thing, then you'll be like God, you'll be whole and complete. In psychoanalysis, that's called the superego. The superego is the inner voice that tells you, if only you are out more, have more friends, or nicer to your mum, whatever it is, if only you do that, then you'll be happy, then you'll be right. And in psychoanalysis, the idea is to get rid of that superego voice, to realize that it doesn't exist. In theological terms, is to exorcise that satanic voice. And in theology, the method is grace. Grace is the acceptance that you don't have to be whole and complete, that you're okay just the way you are. So grace becomes the antidote to this death drive. Oh yes, Angel says, why the innate desire to be whole and complete? So we're already whole and complete, but desire is corrupting something. No, here's the difference between me and, say, progressive and liberal Christianity, is that, interesting, radical theology doesn't say we're already whole and complete. It goes the opposite direction. Radical theology generally says that actually we're not. There is an inherent lack to being human. So a lot of New Age and kind of liberal Christianity says we experience this loss, this lack, but it's an illusion. or we can overcome it, that we can have this harmony and oneness. But in radical theology, the idea is, well, no, actually, that's the problem. The problem is we think there is some wholeness that is just out of reach, that we can get back to if we meditate enough, or maybe in the next life or whatever. But in radical theology, it says, no, to be a human is to experience this sense of loss. And the reason for that is because there is a point when we're infants, when there is no me and no you. There is just this experience of oneness. There's no self. But around the age of 3 months to 18 months, the infant begins to get an experience of themselves as an I, as a person. And as they do that, and I won't go into details about why, because my first seminar does, so check out the first seminar and you'll hear me on this. But basically, as you get a sense of self, you also get a sense that there is something that is not you. And there's a sense that you lost something. But you didn't lose anything. You are the result of the loss. You're the result of this sense of separation. This is why I would argue it's universal. To be a human being is to experience this. But every culture deals with it differently, and some deal with it better and some deal with it worse. But there is this sense that to be a human being is to experience yourself as separate, not just from other things, but also separate from who you would like to be and what you would like to have. There are these experiences of lack that are part of being human. And the result, or sorry, the challenge is to not try to get rid of that, but to turn it into something wonderful, to sublimate it. Salvation is, in a sense, turning that lack into something productive and powerful in society. But I feel like this seminar kind of like really needs to be kind of listened to in relation to the first seminar for some of that stuff to kind of make sense. Let's see. I feel like interestingly, what we've just covered here, you know, it can sound esoteric and can kind of like sound, you know, difficult, but actually it's relatively simple. It's this idea that we have this, what Pascal called a God-shaped hole. Now, he thought it could be filled, but we have this sense of lack, and we think there's a lost object that will fill it. And we seek that, and a lot of religions and a lot of political, political ideologies promise that completeness and that wholeness. But actually, the radical move of Christianity is not that it pays the debt, not that it fills the lack, but that it forgives the lack. That we create a community in which we embrace the enjoyment of not having what we want. And that means the Christian community is a community in which individuals are freed from the frenetic pursuit of wholeness, completeness, full knowledge, full pleasure. It's a community in which people embrace doubt, complexity, ambiguity, unknowing. It is a community that in doing that actually experiences freedom and life, and it becomes something that is very attractive to anyone who is in the frenetic pursuit of wholeness and completeness, whether it's in their work, whether it's in their family life, in their sexual life, in their culture, in their politics. The church is the freedom from that pursuit. All right. There we go. That's an hour of thinking about sin and salvation, and hopefully connecting it a little bit with Easter, because tomorrow is Easter Sunday. I'm going to finish up now. And sorry that cut out briefly. I hope I'm going to find out if everything recorded well. And if it did, I'm going to put this up. If not, I'm actually going to re-record it and put it up in a couple of days. So thank you very much for being part of this. And I appreciate your support and your help, and I will talk to you all very soon. Goodbye.